My son's wife corrected my parenting at Christmas dinner for the fourth year in a row, but I'm tired of taking it. Well, let me just tell you the whole story. My name is Carly Peterson. I'm 67, and I live in West Chase, Florida. If you had walked into my home on Christmas Day, you would have thought you'd stepped right into a holiday magazine. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just one of those women. I love the holidays. I love the tradition. The tree was a big 9-footer, and I'd spent hours making sure all the ornaments my children made in grade school were front and center, right next to the fancy glass ones from Germany. The whole house smelled like pine and cinnamon and the honey-glazed ham that was resting on the counter. I had my best china out, the Lenox holiday pattern. You probably know the one with the green holly and the thin red ribbon. It was my mother's. I'd spent 2 days polishing her silver to match. I had candles lit on the mantel, and Frank Sinatra was singing White Christmas softly on the stereo. Everything, every single detail, was just how I'd always done it. It was perfect. But you can polish silver until you see your face in it, but you can't polish the feeling in a room. And the feeling in my house was tight, like a string pulled just a little too taut. I was just bracing myself. That's the only word for it. I was standing at the counter, pretending to check the potatoes, but really, I was just waiting for the one thing that was guaranteed to not be perfect. My husband, Hubert, was in his recliner, pretending to read the paper. He's 69, and he is a good man. But Hubert's main goal in life, his only goal, really, is to avoid a fuss. He calls it keeping the peace. I've come to call it hiding. Hubert is the type of man who would agree that the sky is bright purple if it meant he didn't have to argue about it. He could feel the tension, too. I could see it in the way he kept clearing his throat. That little ahem he does when he's uncomfortable. My 2 daughters, Charlotte and Evelyn, were in the kitchen with me. They live out of state, and having them home was the best part of the holiday. They were chatting about their kids, trying to keep things light, but they kept shooting me these little worried glances. They know what Christmas dinner has become. Then the doorbell rang, and just like that, the string got tighter. Hubert snapped his paper shut. Charlotte stopped talking mid-sentence. I wiped my hands on my poinsettia print apron, took a deep breath, and went to open the door. And there they were, my son, Floyd, and his wife, Danielle. Floyd is my only son, 45. He looked tired, older than his years. He gave me a quick, one-armed hug. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he mumbled, and he shuffled right past me toward his father. He didn't make eye contact. He hasn't really, not for a few years now. Not at Christmas. And then there was Danielle, 43, and always looking like she just stepped out of a catalog. Perfect dark hair, perfect cashmere sweater, perfect boots. She smiled at me, a bright, brittle smile that never, ever reaches her eyes. "Carly," she said, kissing the air next to my cheek. "Merry Christmas. Your house looks festive, just like always." Festive. I just smiled. That was the first little pebble. Just like always. It's funny how a compliment can be made to sound like an insult, like I was twee or old-fashioned or predictable. We all moved into the dining room. I was just about to bring the turkey to the table. It was a 20-pounder I'd woken up at 5 a.m. to put in the oven. I'd brined it for 2 days. Danielle walked over to the carving station, where the bird was resting. She leaned in, picked up a carving fork, and poked it right in the breast. "Oh," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Looks a little dry, Carly. Did you forget to baste it?" And there it was. I just froze. I had the bowl of sweet potatoes in my hands. I could feel my daughters stop talking in the kitchen. I heard Hubert's ahem from the living room. "Well, I'm sure it's delicious, dear," he called out, his voice overly cheerful. He was talking to me, not to her. Floyd just busied himself with the wine opener, his back to all of us. I didn't say anything. I just smiled. It was the same smile I've used for 4 years. A tight, plastic smile that I'm sure looks more like a grimace. Well, I said, my voice just as cheerful as Hubert's. Let's hope the gravy helps. And I went back to the kitchen to get the green beans. This was the 4th year. The 4th Christmas in a row that Danielle's first words to me, after Merry Christmas, were a criticism. It's become her little tradition. 4 years ago, the first Christmas after she and Floyd moved back to Florida, it was the china. She'd held up her plate, the one my mother had been so proud of, and said, "This holly pattern is a little old-fashioned, isn't it? I just saw a beautiful minimalist set at Crate, and Beryl, we should get you." I smiled and said nothing. 3 years ago, it was the tree. She'd stood in front of it, head tilted, and said, "Did you let the grandkids decorate this? It's cluttered. You know, a simple color-coordinated theme is so much more elegant." I just smiled and said I liked the memories. Last year was when it started to turn. It wasn't just about my things. It was about me. We were talking about my granddaughter, Charlotte's girl, who is a very spirited child. I'd said something about letting kids be kids, just an offhand comment. Danielle gave that little laugh of hers, the one that sounds like ice cubes in a glass. Well, that's one way of looking at it. She'd said, but we're trying to teach our kids actual boundaries. A little more structure back in the day might have helped Floyd, don't you think? He's so non-confrontational. She'd said it right to my face. An arrow dipped in poison, delivered with a smile. She was correcting my parenting, telling me, in front of my whole family, that I had failed my son. And Floyd, my son, Floyd, had just looked down at his plate. He hadn't said a word. Not one. So this year, the turkey is dry wasn't just about the turkey. It was never about the turkey. It was Danielle's opening shot. Her way of reminding everyone that she was in charge, that I was old, that I was old-fashioned, that I was doing it all wrong. Every year, she'd chip away at me. My home, my traditions, my children. And every year, I'd let her. I'd swallowed my pride, bit my tongue, and smiled that horrible plastic smile. I did it to keep the peace. For Hubert, who can't stand a fuss. And for Floyd, my boy, who I was so terrified of losing. I told myself, that's what mothers do. We absorb the blows. We are the peacemakers. We hold the family together, even if the pieces are sharp and cutting us. We all sat down at the table I had set with so much love, the food I had cooked with so much care. My daughters were trying to talk to Floyd about his new job. Hubert was praising the cranberry sauce, a little too loudly, and Danielle was explaining to Evelyn, in great detail, all the reasons she just couldn't live in this part of Florida anymore. I just sat there at the head of my own table, listening to the clink of my mother's silver against my wedding china. I looked at the dry turkey. I looked at Hubert, avoiding my eyes. I looked at Floyd, my son, who wouldn't look at me. And something broke. It wasn't loud. It was just a tiny, quiet snap inside my chest. I was 67 years old, and I was tired. I was so tired of taking it. I knew, right then, that I wasn't going to make it through this dinner. Not like this. Not again. This was the last year. I sat down and picked up the bowl of sweet potatoes. I could feel the heat from the dish through the trivet. "Charlotte, dear, would you pass the green beans to your father?" I tried to slide back into the role I'd played for 47 years. The hostess, the mother, the woman who makes everything run smoothly. The woman who pretends not to hear. I looked at Hubert. He was carving the turkey, the one Danielle had just pronounced dry. He was focusing on it with the kind of intense concentration you'd think he was defusing a bomb. And in his mind, I suppose he was. Hubert has been carving his way out of uncomfortable conversations for our entire marriage. He's a good man, I know that. He's a kind man, but his silence has a cost. And for decades, I was the one who always paid the bill. I'd look at him, sitting right next to me, hoping, just praying, that he'd catch my eye, that he'd just once give me a little look that said, "I see it, Carly. I know she's being rude. Are you okay?" But he never did. He just focused on making those perfect, even slices. He'd praise the cranberry sauce. He'd ask Floyd about the drive over. And his passivity, his desperate need to avoid a fuss, felt like agreement. It felt like he was tacitly approving of her behavior. It told me, clear as day, that my feelings, my dignity, were less important than his comfort. It was a familiar, dull ache, and it had been sitting in my chest for years. Then I glanced across the table at Floyd. My son. He was pouring a glass of wine for his wife, his head ducked down. He wouldn't look at me. He sat so stiffly, his shoulders were practically up around his ears. He looked trapped. He looked small. And that's what made this all so much worse. It wasn't just Danielle, a woman I barely knew who had married into my family. It was my son. He would hear his wife insult me, and he would just shrink. He'd stare at his plate. He'd disappear, right in front of my eyes. He wouldn't defend me. He wouldn't even look at me. It was like in those moments, I wasn't his mother anymore. I was just a problem, an embarrassment that his wife had to point out. That feeling, the feeling of being erased by my own child, was 1,000 times worse than any comment about a dry turkey. It made me feel completely, utterly alone, even at a table full of people I loved. My daughter Charlotte, bless her heart, tried to fill the silence. She's a peacemaker, like her father, but with more courage. "So, Danielle," she said, her voice bright, "how is your new decorating project going? I saw the pictures on Facebook. It looks amazing." Danielle lit up. This was her stage. "Oh, it's wonderful," she said. "We're going with a very clean, minimalist Scandinavian look. It's just so much more elegant than all this." She waved her hand, gesturing vaguely at my dining room, my warm cherrywood buffet, the hutch my father had built, the poinsettia centerpiece. Then all this clutter. Clutter. She'd used that exact word 3 years ago. She'd stood in front of my tree, the one I'd spent days on, and she'd tilted her head. I can still see her, holding one of Floyd's old kindergarten ornaments, a little clay handprint painted a messy blue with Floyd 1983 carved into it. You know, she'd said, "A simple color-coordinated theme is so much more elegant. This is just cluttered." I'd told her I liked the memories. She'd smiled that smile. "Oh, of course. Memories are nice." As if they were something to be kept in a box, in the attic, not something to be cherished and displayed. My other daughter, Evelyn, jumped in. She's more like me, a little more fire. "Well, my kids are just excited for their presents. Mom, you always get them the best things. They're still playing with that fire truck from last year." She was trying to help, to throw me a lifeline. It didn't work. Danielle put her fork down. "Actually, Evelyn," she said, in that patient voice she used, the one that implied everyone else was slightly stupid, "we're trying to pivot to experiences rather than things for our kids. All these plastic toys, it's just so wasteful and bad for their development. We're asking the family to please contribute to their $529 college fund instead." I remembered that fire truck. I bought it last Christmas. My grandson, her son, was obsessed with fire trucks. He'd talk about them all day. I found a big red one, the kind he could sit in and pedal. I'll never forget the look on his face when he saw it. His eyes got as big as saucers, and he just screamed with joy. It was the best sound in the world. And I'll never forget Danielle later pulling me aside in the kitchen. Carly, I know you meant well, she'd said, but that toy is enormous, it's plastic, and it's not what we want for him. It's frankly a bit much. We prefer you just give him a check next time. She'd taken all the joy, all the grandmotherness out of it and turned my gift into a burden. A mistake. Another thing I'd done wrong. I must have been quiet for too long, just pushing my food around my plate, because suddenly Floyd cleared his throat. He spoke. To me. So, Mom, how's your garden? He was trying. It was a weak, clumsy attempt, but he was trying to connect. I felt a little flicker of hope. It's lovely, dear. I started. The azaleas this year are just... Before I could finish, Danielle laid her hand on his arm. A gesture that looked loving, but was a claim. A warning. Floyd is just being sensitive. Carly, she said sweetly, but her eyes were on me. He always worries about you. He gets that from you, that oversensitivity. And there it was, the same theme from last year, the one that had really, truly hurt. We'd been talking about Floyd's job. He'd been unhappy, and I'd told him, honey, life is too short to be miserable. You're so smart. I know you can find something that makes you happy. Just a normal, motherly thing to say. And Danielle had pounced. Well, that's one way of looking at it, Carly, she'd said, that same patient, correcting tone. But we're trying to teach our kids about commitment. A little more structure back in the day might have helped Floyd. He's so non-confrontational. She'd smiled right at me as she said it. It was a direct hit. She wasn't just saying my china was old. She was saying I had failed, that I had raised a weak son, that his unhappiness, his character, his very nature was my fault. And now, here at the table, she was doing it again. He gets that from you. She was diagnosing us, telling me that my son's virtue, his kindness, his gentle heart, was a flaw that I had given him. And my son, my Floyd, he just let her. He heard his wife call him, and his mother, oversensitive, and he just looked down. He let her hand rest on his arm. He didn't defend himself, and he didn't defend me. So as I sat there at my festive table, looking at my dry turkey, I wasn't just angry about what she'd said 2 minutes ago. I was drowning in years of this, years of being called cluttered and old-fashioned and wasteful and a bad mother. I looked at Danielle, so smug and perfect, already moving on, asking Charlotte about her flight. I looked at Hubert, who was suddenly fascinated by his mashed potatoes. And I looked at Floyd, who was just a ghost at his own mother's table. They were all complicit. Danielle was the one holding the knife, but Hubert and Floyd, they were the ones holding me down so she could cut. And that little snap I'd felt earlier, when she'd poked the turkey, it turned into a deep, cold, quiet crack. It was the sound of something breaking for good. The mask I was wearing, the plastic smile, the one that said, everything is fine, it was getting heavier and heavier. I knew I couldn't hold it up for much longer. My hands were resting in my lap, but I could feel them hot and stiff. I tried to just breathe, just let it pass. Let the oversensitive comment fade into the air, just like all the other little cuts and jabs. Hubert, in his typical fashion, rushed in to change the subject. He's like a frantic firefighter, but instead of water, he just throws a different, safer topic on the fire. Well, anyway, he said, and his voice was too loud. That fake, cheerful dad voice. Floyd, tell us about the new job. You liking it over at that tech firm? Big change from sales, I bet. He was trying to steer the conversation to solid ground, but he had just steered us all right off a cliff. Floyd, who had been hiding behind his wine glass, was suddenly in the spotlight. He tensed up. He'd just left a 15-year career in pharmaceutical sales. It was a good, safe job, but he told me in a rare, quiet moment that it was eating him alive. This new tech job was a risk, less pay to start, but he was excited. Or he had been. It's good, Dad, Floyd said, shifting in his chair. It's different. A lot to learn, but the people are smart. It's a challenge. I was so proud of him. It was the first truly brave thing I'd seen him do for himself in years. I told him so on the phone. Honey, life is too short to be miserable. I'd said, you're so smart. I know you can find something that makes you happy. It was just what a mother says. But Danielle couldn't let him have his own answer. She jumped in, placing her hand on his arm. That proprietary hand. It's a lateral move at best, she said, correcting him. The benefits are nowhere near as good, and his stock options are just paper money at this point. But he was unhappy. She said that word, unhappy, like it was a terrible weakness, a character flaw. He needed a change. He gets these ideas. My daughter Evelyn, trying to support her brother, said, I think it's great, Floyd. It's brave to try something new. Danielle gave Evelyn that patient, condescending smile. It's impulsive, Evelyn is what it is. But he's always been a bit of a dreamer. She patted Floyd's arm the way you'd pat a dog. Luckily, he has me to keep him grounded. The air at the table was just thick. It was suffocating. She was talking about my son, her husband, as if he were a foolish child who couldn't be trusted to make his own decisions. And Floyd, he just sat there and let her. He shrank a little more, staring at that wine glass as if it held all the answers. I must have had a look on my face. I'm sure I did. I wasn't smiling my plastic smile anymore. I was just watching. And I think my disgust, my sadness must have been plain on my face, because Danielle's eyes, sharp as little tacks, swiveled from Floyd, past Evelyn, and landed right on me. She laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound, like tiny shards of glass. Oh, Carly, she said, shaking her head slowly, as if she were disappointed in me. I'm sure you tried your best with Floyd. You really did. The table went dead silent. I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel. Frank Sinatra had just finished his song. My daughter Charlotte froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Hubert just stared at his plate. Danielle wasn't done. She leaned in a little, her voice full of that fake, sweet concern. But sometimes I just wonder, she said, looking right at me, if some of his choices... She nodded her head toward Floyd, who was now a statue, like this new dream job, or even, well, just his choices in general. I wonder if they would have been different if he'd had better guidance when he was growing up. And there it was. It wasn't about the turkey. It wasn't about the china. It wasn't even about the cluttered tree. This was it, the real thing. This was no longer a snide remark or a difference of opinion. This was a public declaration at my Christmas dinner table in front of my husband and my other children that I had failed as a mother, that my son was a collection of bad choices and impulsive dreams because I had given him bad guidance. I felt the blood rush to my face. It was a hot, prickling wave that went right up my neck and into my ears. My hands, which were clasped in my lap, started to tremble. I grabbed them, one with the other, digging my nails into my own palms just to feel something real. My heart wasn't just beating, it was thudding. A heavy, sick thud, like a bird trapped in a box. I did what I always did. I looked for help. I looked at my husband, Hubert, my partner of 47 years. He was staring at his plate with an intensity that would have burned a hole through my mother's china. He was frozen. He didn't move. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at me. He had just vanished. He practiced this invisibility. He had left me. He had left me completely alone to take the bullet. Then I looked at Floyd, my son, the man I was being accused of failing, the boy I had held. He was staring at his plate, too. His face was white. He didn't move a muscle. Then, slowly, as if he were in a trance, he lifted his wine glass to his lips and took a long, slow drink. He didn't look at his wife. And he did not look at me. That was it. That was the moment. The little crack inside my chest, the one that had been splitting and splintering for years, just shattered. It broke wide open, and in its place was a terrible, cold, and clarifying thought. They will not protect me. It wasn't that they couldn't. They wouldn't. My husband would not sacrifice his 30 minutes of peace. My son would not risk an uncomfortable car ride home with his wife. My dignity, my honor as a mother, the very core of who I was, it was a perfectly acceptable price for them to pay for their own quiet. I had spent my entire life as the dam. I was the one who held everything back. I held back the arguments to protect Hubert's nerves. I held back my worries to protect my children. I held back my own needs, my own voice to protect the idea of a happy family. And I realized, looking at my husband's bowed head and my son's empty stare, I was the only one protecting anything. The dam broke. All the years, all the swallowed insults, all the just let it go, Carly, all that it's not worth a fuss, all the lonely nights I'd cried because my husband would rather read the paper than see me, all the heartache of watching my son disappear into this angry, critical woman. It all rushed up, but it wasn't hot. It wasn't a scream. It was cold. It was perfectly, terribly calm. My hands stopped trembling. I unclasped them in my lap. Danielle was still watching me. She had that little smirk on her face. She was waiting for me to do what I always did, smile that tight plastic smile, and ask, "Who wants more potatoes?" She thought she had one. She thought she'd just delivered the final word. I lifted my head. I looked right at her, right into her eyes. I felt the plastic smile on my face, the one I had worn for years, just melt away. I let my face be exactly what it was, the face of a 67-year-old woman who had finally had enough. Danielle's smirk faltered. Her eyes flickered. She could see it. She knew something was different. The room was so quiet. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. This year, everything changes. I just looked at her. My face was bare. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't angry. I was just done. Danielle's smirk was gone. It had been replaced by a tight, confused, wary look. She knew the rules had just changed, but she didn't know what the new rules were. She was watching me, waiting for me to do what I always did. Smooth it over, offer her more ham, pretend I hadn't heard. The silence at the table was heavy. It was a physical thing, pressing down on all of us. The only sound was the clock on the mantel. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It sounded like a hammer. My daughters, Charlotte and Evelyn, were frozen. They were watching me with wide, terrified eyes. Hubert, my husband, was staring at his hands, which were clasped on the table so tightly his knuckles were white. He looked like he was praying. And Floyd, my son, he had his eyes closed. He had just checked out. He was gone. I knew, right then, nobody was coming to save me. This was it. Slowly, deliberately, I placed my knife on the edge of my plate. I set it down, so carefully it didn't make a sound. Then I placed my fork on the plate, right next to the knife. The little clink of the silver against my mother's china was as loud as a bell ringing in a church. Hubert flinched. He made a tiny sound, a little like he'd been poked. I picked up my linen napkin from my lap, the one with the little holly leaves I'd embroidered by hand 30 years ago. I unfolded it. I dabbed the left corner of my mouth. then the right. My hand was not shaking. I was surprised by that. I felt calm, colder than I'd felt in years. I refolded the napkin carefully, making sure the creases were straight, and I placed it on the table right next to my plate. Then I turned. I didn't just turn my head. I turned my whole body in my chair. I swiveled my hips, planted both of my feet flat on the floor, and faced Danielle directly. I was no longer the hostess at the head of the table. I was just a woman speaking to another woman. The silence stretched. It was unbearable. I let it sit there and press on all of them. I let them feel the weight of what she had just said. Finally, I took a breath. My voice, when it came out, didn't tremble. It was low, and it was clear, and it was mine. Danielle. Hubert's head shot up. He made a noise, a little gasp. Carly, he whispered. It was a warning, a plea. Don't make a fuss. I didn't look at him. I didn't look at my daughters. I kept my eyes right on Danielle. For the past 4 years, I said, my voice as steady as the table we were sitting at, you have come into my home for Christmas. Danielle's face began to tighten. Her nostrils flared just a little. She knew this wasn't going to be an apology. And for 4 years, I continued, you have used this dinner as an opportunity to insult me. Now, Carly, Hubert said, his voice stronger, fake and hearty. That's not fair. I'm sure she didn't mean. Be quiet, Hubert. I didn't yell. I didn't snap. I just said it. And he stopped. He actually, for the first time in our 47 years of marriage, just stopped talking. His mouth hung open. I turned back to Danielle. Her eyes were hard. You've criticized my cooking, I said, and I nodded at the turkey. You've criticized my home. You've called my memories clutter. You've criticized the gifts I give to my grandchildren. I leaned in just an inch. My voice got even quieter. And for the last 2 years, you have decided it is your place to publicly correct my parenting of my son. Her face was turning red, a splotchy, angry red that started at the high collar of her expensive sweater. She wasn't used to this. She was the one who attacked, not the one who was attacked. And for 4 years, I said, and this was the most important part, I have let you. This was the part that made my daughters look at each other. I have sat right here. I went on, and I have smiled. I have said nothing. I've held my tongue. I've done it because I didn't want to fuss. I thought I was keeping the peace. I thought I was protecting my husband from an argument he didn't want. I thought I was protecting my son. I glanced at Floyd. His eyes were open now. They were wide with a kind of terror. He looked like a little boy who was about to watch his 2 favorite toys break, protecting my son from being caught in the middle. I turned back to Danielle. But I was wrong. I wasn't keeping the peace. I was just letting you. I was teaching you that it was okay to treat me this way. I was teaching my own children that it was acceptable for someone to disrespect their mother. I was teaching my husband that my feelings, my dignity, were less important than his comfort. I took one more breath, but not this time. I said it, and the world didn't end. The ceiling didn't fall in. This is my home, I said, my voice still quiet, but it cut through the room. This is my table. This is my family. And you will not disrespect me in my own home again. The silence that followed was absolute. It was loud. Danielle just stared at me. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. She looked like a fish. She was sputtering. She had lost the script. She had no lines for this. She tried to laugh. It came out as a strangled squeak. Carly, my goodness, it was just a joke. She looked around the table, desperate, trying to find someone to back her up. I was just teasing you. You're being so sensitive. There it was, the classic defense. It was a joke. You're too sensitive. I was the one with the problem. I was the one ruining Christmas. The old me, the me from 10 minutes ago, would have grabbed onto that joke excuse like a drowning woman. I would have said, "Oh, oh, of course, dear. I know. I'm just tired. I'm sorry." I would have apologized to her. I would have smoothed it all over just to make the terrible silence stop. I felt the pull. That old habit, the deep, deep groove of 47 years of peacemaking. Just make it stop, Carly. But I looked at her, her flustered, angry face, her eyes, which were not apologetic, but furious. She wasn't sorry she'd said it. She was just sorry I'd called her on it. And I looked at her, and I felt nothing, just stillness. The panic was gone. "No, Danielle," I said, my voice still perfectly calm, perfectly low. "I know exactly how you are." Her face fell. That one hit, that one landed right where I'd aimed it. "I know exactly how you are," I repeated. "And it's over." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. The conversation was finished. I was finishing it. We will not be speaking of my parenting again. And then I turned back to the table. I swiveled my chair, so I was facing my plate again. I picked up my napkin from the table, unfolded it, and placed it back in my lap. I picked up my knife. I picked up my fork. I cut a small piece of the dry turkey. I dipped it in the gravy. I put it in my mouth. It was delicious, and I just ate in the dead, echoing, terrible silence of the room I had just broken. No one moved. I was the only person at the table eating. I could hear the tiny scrape of my own fork against my mother's china. It was the only sound in the room. My daughters, Charlotte and Evelyn, were stiff, their eyes darting from me to Danielle and back again. Hubert was as pale as the tablecloth. He looked like he'd just seen a ghost, or worse, like he was about to become one. Floyd, my son, hadn't moved. He was still staring at his plate, his face white. And Danielle, she was just staring at me. Her mouth was slightly open. The splotchy, angry red was climbing up her neck and covering her cheeks. I had taken the script away from her. I had said my piece. And then I had dismissed her. I had picked up my fork. I had returned to my meal. I had taken away her power, and I could see in her eyes that this was the one thing she would not forgive. The silence stretched for 1 second, 2, 10. It was Danielle who finally broke it. Scrape. It was a horrible, jarring sound. The sound of her chair legs dragging against my hardwood floor as she pushed herself back. Everyone flinched, except me. I just watched her. "Well," she said. Her voice was no longer light and tinkling. It was low, and it was shaking with an anger so hot I could almost feel it from across the table. She stood up. Her chair was left crooked, a glaring disruption in my perfect dining room. She grabbed her linen napkin, the one I had washed and ironed. She didn't fold it. She didn't place it. She wadded it up in her fist, a tight, angry ball of white fabric. And then she threw it. It landed right on her plate, on top of the food she hadn't touched. It was a gesture of such pure, childish contempt it almost made me laugh. She said, biting off the word. "I have never, in my entire life, been so insulted." The irony of it, her saying she was insulted, just hung there in the air. She looked around the table, wild-eyed, searching for an ally. She looked at Hubert, who was staring at the napkin on her plate. She looked at my daughters, who were watching her with open dislike. And then her eyes landed on her husband. "Floyd." It wasn't a request. It was an order. A short, sharp command. "We are leaving." She didn't look at me again. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't say Merry Christmas. She just turned, her back ramrod straight, and she stormed out of my dining room. We could all hear her, her sharp, expensive boot heels clacking on the wood floor of the hallway. Clack, clack, clack. The sound of her grabbing her purse and her perfectly tailored coat from the bench in the foyer. Now, every single eye at the table, including mine, was on Floyd. He was trapped. He looked horrified. He was a man caught in a terrible, terrible machine. His eyes flickered from his wife's empty chair to the wad of napkin on her plate, and then to me. I was just sitting there. I was watching him. I wasn't going to help him. I wasn't going to say, "Oh, no, Floyd, please make her stay. I'm sorry." I was just waiting. And into that terrible, heavy silence, my husband finally found his voice. Hubert turned to me, not to his son, to me. His voice was a low, pleading, angry hiss. "Carly," he was scolding me. Even now, after what she had said, I was the one who had made the mess. "Now, Carly," he whispered, perhaps this just wasn't the time." I stopped eating. I set my fork and knife down, very, very slowly. I turned my head, and I looked at my husband. I wasn't angry. I was so very tired. I looked at this man I had loved for almost 50 years, this man whose comfort I had prized above my own dignity. "It's 4 years past the time. Hubert," I said. My voice was as quiet as his, but it wasn't pleading. It was just a fact. His face crumpled. "You've been sitting right here for every one of those years," I said, just for him. "You heard her. You've heard her every time. And you have never, not once, said a word." He had no answer. He just looked at me. He was seeing a woman he didn't know. We all heard it at the same time. The sound of the front door opening. A rush of cold, damp Florida air, what we call cold, anyway, washed into the dining room, making the candle flames flicker. She was standing there, holding the door open. She was waiting for him. That sound, that draft of cold air, it broke the spell for Floyd. He looked at me. His eyes. I will never forget his eyes. They weren't angry. They weren't sad. They were accusing. He was looking at me like I had done this, like I had put him in this position. I had forced this choice. I had ruined Christmas. He didn't say, "Mom, I'm sorry." He didn't say, "Mom, I'll talk to her." He didn't say, "Danielle, wait, don't be rude." He just stood up. He didn't throw his napkin. He just dropped it. It fell from his hand onto his chair. He didn't look at his sisters. He didn't look at his father. He looked at me one last time with those awful, accusing, terrified eyes. And then he turned his back on me. He walked out of the dining room. He walked down the hall. We heard his voice, a low mumble. "Danielle, just get in the car." And then thud, the sound of the solid oak front door closing. The holiday was over. The house was just silent, not the tight, tense silence from before. This was a new kind, a hollow, broken, empty silence. Frank Sinatra had started singing again. "I'll be home for Christmas." It was just awful. I looked at the table, my beautiful table, my mother's china, my father's hutch, my perfect dry turkey, and the 2 empty chairs. One, the chair of the woman who had insulted me, and the other, the chair of my son, my only son, my daughter Charlotte, my oldest. She finally broke the silence. Her voice was just a little whisper. "Mom." She had tears in her eyes. My other daughter, Evelyn, the fiery one, she let out a breath she'd been holding. "Wow," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "Good riddance." Hubert didn't say a word. He just put his head in his hands. He leaned his elbows on the table and covered his face. And me, I just stared at Floyd's empty chair. The strength I had felt that cold, hard resolve. It was ebbing. And in its place, a new feeling was rushing in. A cold, sick, hollow feeling. The guilt, the doubt. Oh, God, I thought, what have I done? He's gone. I stood up for myself and my son. He walked out. I had finally spoken, and it had cost me my son. My daughter Charlotte was the first to move. She got up, came over to me, and put her hands on my shoulders. I must have been trembling because she just squeezed me. Mom, are you okay? I couldn't answer. I just nodded. I was still staring at his chair. Evelyn, my other daughter, let out a long, shaky breath. Well, she said, her voice dripping with anger. She's a witch, and he's a coward. Evelyn, Hubert said. His voice was muffled, still hidden behind his hands. Don't. He's your brother. And she's my mother. Evelyn shot back, and I heard her stand up. He just let his wife accuse his own mother of being a bad parent. And then he left with her. I don't care if he's my brother. Dad, that was just pathetic. Hubert had no answer for that. The rest of Christmas Day was a fog. It was the longest, quietest day of my life. My daughters tried. They were wonderful. They cleared the table. They packed up the food. They didn't even ask me. They just did it. They put all that food I'd spent 2 days cooking into plastic containers. Pounds and pounds of dry turkey. A whole bowl of sweet potatoes nobody had touched. Charlotte kept trying to talk to me. Mom, what are you going to do? She'd ask, her eyes wide with worry. I don't know, honey. I'd say, I don't know. Evelyn was just angry. She was walking around the kitchen, helping, but she was muttering. For years she's been doing this. I'm proud of you, Mom. I'm just furious it took this long. But I wasn't proud. That cold, hard strength I'd felt at the table, it was gone. It had drained right out of me, and all that was left was this hollow, sick feeling, that look in Floyd's eyes, that look of accusation, like I was the one who had thrown the bomb. He was right, wasn't he? I had finally thrown it, and it had blown my family apart. Hubert just disappeared. He said he needed some air, and he went out to the garage. He stayed out there for 3 hours, puttering, I guess. He was hiding, just like he always did. My daughters left the next day. They had to get back to their own families, their own lives. We had a sad little breakfast of leftover ham. We didn't talk about it again. We didn't know what to say. They hugged me tight at the door. You call me Mom, Charlotte said. You call me the minute you hear from him. Don't you dare apologize to her, Mom. Evelyn said, her voice fierce. Do not. You have nothing to apologize for. And then they were gone. And the silence in that house was deafening. The Christmas tree was still up, but the lights seemed garish. All that light, all that joy, in a house that felt like a funeral. Hubert and we just existed. We moved around each other. He'd go into the living room and turn on the news, but he'd keep the volume so low it was just a murmur. I'd go into the kitchen and wipe counters that were already clean. I'd scrubbed my mother's china and polished the silver and put it all away. I packed up all those little handmade ornaments from the cluttered tree. I did it all with this heavy, aching weight in my chest. The phone was the worst part. Every time it rang, my heart would just leap into my throat. It's him. It's Floyd. But it never was. It was Charlotte calling to check in. Anything? No, honey, nothing. It was Evelyn. He still hasn't called. Unbelievable. What a coward. Are you okay, Mom? I'm fine, dear. Don't you worry. It was a neighbor calling to wish us a Merry Christmas. I had to force my voice to sound cheerful. Oh, yes, it was lovely. Just lovely. The whole family was here. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. But Floyd? Nothing. Danielle? Of course, nothing. And Hubert? Less than nothing. He would not talk about it. He would not say Floyd. He would not say Danielle. He just acted like Christmas Day had been a normal, perfectly fine day, and that two of our guests had just evaporated. It was December 27th, 2 days after. The silence in the house was so thick, I felt like I was wading through cold water. I was in the kitchen, wrapping the last of the ham to put in the freezer, and Hubert walked in. He was holding his empty coffee cup. He walked over to the coffee maker, poured himself a cup, and was about to walk right back out. He was just going to leave. Again. And I broke. You know, I said. My voice was quiet, but it was scratchy. I hadn't really talked in 2 days. He stopped. His back was to me. What's that, dear? You never said a word. He sighed. A long put-upon sigh. Like I was the one being difficult. He turned around, leaning against the counter. Carly, please, let's not rehash it. Rehash it? I said, we haven't hashed it. You've been hiding in the garage. You've been pretending it didn't happen. What's the point of talking about it? He said, and his voice was getting that defensive, irritated edge. It's done. It's over. You did what you did. Now we just have to wait. I put the ham down on the counter. I just looked at him. I did what I did. I did. Well, you're the one who... He stammered. You're the one who picked the fight, Carly. I picked the fight, I said, and my voice was rising. She sat at my table in my house and told me I was a bad mother. She said Floyd was impulsive and had bad guidance, and I picked the fight. She was just talking. Carly, it's just Danielle. You know how she is. You should have just let it go, like you always do. I walked right up to him, like I always do. Yes, he said. Now Floyd is gone, and she's furious, and for what? For what, Carly? Just to have the last word. I stared at him, the man I had shared a bed with for 47 years. When you whispered at me at that table, I said, my voice shaking now. When you said, perhaps this isn't the time. That wasn't an apology, Hubert. That wasn't you supporting me. That was a scolding. You were angry at me for making you uncomfortable. His face, he knew it was true. You were right there. I whispered. You've been right there for 4 years. You heard her call my home cluttered. You heard her say my gifts were wasteful. You heard her say I failed our son. And you did nothing. You just sat there. You let me take it. You let her humiliate me. You would rather I be humiliated than you be uncomfortable for 5 minutes. That's what you did. Hubert, you left me. You've been leaving me alone at that table for years. My own words just hung there. I'd never said any of this out loud. He wasn't angry anymore. He just deflated. He looked old. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. He slid down the counter and sat in one of the kitchen chairs. He put his coffee cup down. He stared into it. I know, he whispered. I almost didn't hear him. What? He looked up at me, and his eyes were full of tears. Hubert never cried. I know, he said again, his voice cracking. I hear it, Carly. I always hear it. Then why? I whispered. Why do you never say anything? He just shook his head. He looked down at his hands. I don't know how. How? You just speak, Hubert. You just say, Danielle, that's enough. I can't, he said, and his voice was suddenly anguished. You don't understand. My father, all he ever did was yell. Fighting was the air we breathed. I just swore I'd never hate it. Carly, I just freeze. I just wanted to stop. He looked at me, and it was a confession. And you, he said, his voice just broken. You've always been so strong. You just handle it. You handle everything. You always have. I just stared at him. So you let me? I said, you just let me take all of it because I'm strong? No, he said, and he looked ashamed. I let you because I'm weak. I've been hiding, he said, hiding behind you. I've been doing it our whole marriage. I just was afraid. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in maybe 20 years. It wasn't a fix. It didn't make the last 4 years go away. It didn't make the pain of Christmas go away. But it was true. I just stood there, in the kitchen, with the leftover ham on the counter, and the Christmas tree still lit in the other room. He hadn't betrayed me because he didn't love me. He'd betrayed me because he was a coward. And I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know what to say. So I just sat down across from him. In the silence. It was a different kind of silence, though. It wasn't the silence of avoidance. It was the silence of two people who had just finally told the truth. It was painful. It was awful. And it was the first real conversation we'd had in years. We just sat there, at the kitchen table. The coffee in Hubert's cup was long cold. My own hands were just empty, resting on the table. That confession, I let you because I'm weak, it hung in the air between us. It changed everything, and it changed nothing. Floyd was still gone. My son hadn't called, but the house felt different. The next 2 days, the 28th and the 29th, the terrible, heavy silence was gone. It was replaced by something else. A quiet, a fragile quiet. Hubert didn't hide in the garage. He didn't just disappear behind the newspaper. He stayed. He sat in the kitchen with me while I read the paper. He made the coffee, and he brought me a cup. He just set it down on the table next to me. It sounds like such a small, stupid thing, doesn't it? A man bringing his wife a cup of coffee. But it felt like a peace treaty. It felt like he was seeing me. We talked, but we didn't talk about it. We couldn't. It was too raw. We talked about the weather. We talked about a neighbor's dog. We talked about nothing. But it was the most important nothing we'd talked in years. It was together. But the phone. The phone was a monster. It sat on the kitchen wall, just waiting. Every time it rang, we both jump. My heart would do a painful, lurching thump in my chest. Hubert would look at me. Are you? I'd shake my head. You get it. He'd pick it up. Hello. His face would relax. Oh, hi, Charlotte, honey. And I'd let out the breath I was holding. My daughters called twice a day. Anything? No, honey, nothing yet. Are you okay, Mom? I'm okay. And I was almost, that hollow, sick feeling of guilt, it was still there, that look in Floyd's eyes. I saw it every time I closed my own, but it was different now. After Hubert's confession, I wasn't just the crazy one who'd blown up Christmas. I was a woman who had finally been told the truth. I had this tiny, hard kernel of validation. It was something to hold on to. It was the 29th. For days after Christmas, for days of silence from my son. We were cleaning up after dinner, just soup and sandwiches. I couldn't bring myself to cook. The thought of all that effort, I just didn't have it in me. The phone rang. It was 7:30 at night. Hubert and we just froze. We looked at each other. This was different. It wasn't my daughters. They always called in the morning. Hubert just nodded at me. You should get it, Carly. I wiped my damp hands on a dish towel. I walked over to the phone. My hand was shaking just a little. I picked it up. Hello. Silence. Just the sound of breathing. Hello. I said again, my voice sharper. And then, Mom. The relief, it was so strong, so sudden, my knees almost buckled. I had to grab the counter. Floyd. It came out as a whisper, a gasp. "Oh, Floyd, are you okay? Is Dad there?" His voice. It wasn't my son's voice. It was thin and strained and so distant. It was the voice of a stranger. Yes, honey, he's right here." I looked at Hubert. His face was white. He was holding onto the back of a chair. "Floyd," I said, fumbling for the button. "I'm putting you on speaker." "Okay, fine," he said. Just one flat word. I pressed the button. The little green light came on. The sound of nothing, of static, filled the kitchen. "Son." Hubert's voice was gravelly. He sounded old. "Hi, Dad." Another silence. "Floyd, honey, we've been—" I started, but he just talked right over me. "Look," he said. "Mom, I don't have a lot of time." I could hear it. The control. He was speaking in a measured, careful way. The way you talk when someone is in the next room, listening. My heart, which had been leaping with relief, just sank. It sank right down into my shoes. This wasn't an apology. "Things here," he said, and he let out a long, slow breath. "Things here are tense, Mom. They're really tense." I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry to hear that, Floyd. I really am." "Yeah," he said. "Well." Another silence. He was struggling. He was trying to say something. "Look, Mom," he said, and his voice got softer. "I guess I understand why you did it." My eyes flew open. I looked at Hubert. Hubert's eyes were wide. Floyd stammered. "I know she can be—" He couldn't say it. He couldn't say cruel. He couldn't say mean. "She can be difficult." He said it. He'd admitted it. He saw it. I felt this surge of hope, of joy, almost. He sees me. He knows. "Oh, Floyd," I said. "Honey, But, and there it was, the word that just killed everything. "But you just really made things difficult, Mom. You really blew everything up." I just had no air. It was the same accusation I'd seen in his eyes when he'd walked out. "You did this." I was the one who was difficult. I was the one who had blown it up. Not Danielle, who had attacked me, who had defended myself. Hubert let go of the chair. He sat down. He just sank. I felt that old instinct rising up in me. The peacemaker. The fixer. The guilt was overwhelming. Oh, God, he's right. I've ruined it. I've ruined everything. My son's marriage is tense, and it's my fault. I should have just been quiet. I should have just let her. The words, they were right on the tip of my tongue. "Oh, Floyd, I'm so sorry. I'll call her. I'll apologize. I'll do anything. Just don't be mad at me. Just come home." I wanted my son back. I opened my mouth. I was going to say it. I was going to apologize. And I looked at Hubert. He was sitting at the table, his head in his hands. He looked defeated. And I remembered his voice just 2 days ago, right here in this kitchen. "I let you because I'm weak. I've been hiding behind you." And I realized what I was about to do. I was about to agree with them. I was about to agree that I was the problem. I was about to undo the one true, honest, painful thing I had done for myself in my entire adult life. I was about to crawl back into that box. The strong one. The one who just takes it. And I suddenly saw the whole conversation. I saw my son hiding, probably in his garage, calling me on a phone his wife, probably checks. And he hadn't asked. He hadn't once said, "Mom, are you okay?" He hadn't said, "Mom, I'm so sorry she said that to you." He hadn't said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I froze. I'm sorry I didn't defend you." He hadn't apologized. He hadn't checked on me. He was scolding me, just like his father used to. He was telling me that my feelings, my dignity had made his life difficult. He wasn't calling to fix us. He was calling for me to fix his problem with his wife. And that new, cold, sad clarity, it just washed over me. And it washed all the guilt right out. And all that was left was just this profound sadness. My son, my boy, he was just like his father. He was a coward, and he was asking me to be strong so he could be weak. And I just couldn't. Not anymore. My hand was still on the receiver, but I was just standing there, frozen. I had just seen the whole ugly, painful truth. My son was not calling to see if I was okay. He was calling to manage the tense situation I had created for him. Hubert was watching me. He could see the apology I was about to make just die on my lips. He saw the shift. On the speaker, the silence stretched. Floyd was waiting. He was waiting for me to do what I always did. He was waiting for me to fix it. He finally cleared his throat, his voice impatient. Mom, did you hear me? It's a mess. And then he said the words that just broke the whole thing open. Mom, I'm really caught in the middle here. His voice was a whine. It was the voice of a little boy who was about to have his toys taken away. It was a voice steeped in self-pity. I don't know what you want me to do, he said, his agitation growing. I can't choose, Mom. I can't choose between my mother and my wife. I looked across the kitchen at my husband, Hubert, who, just 2 days ago, in this very room, had confessed that he'd let me take all the blows for 47 years because he was weak, because I was the strong one. And now I was listening to my son say the exact same thing. He was caught. He couldn't choose. He was weak. And he was asking me, just as his father had done for our entire marriage, to be strong for him. He was asking me to be the one to back down, to be the one to absorb the disrespect, so he could have peace. I saw the whole miserable cycle right there in front of me. I was listening to my son become his father, and I just couldn't. I couldn't do it. I couldn't sign up for another 40 years of this. I couldn't let this be my son's life, and I couldn't let it be mine. I took a deep breath. My hand on the counter was steady. Floyd, I said, my voice was not the voice he was waiting for. It wasn't the "I'm so sorry, I'll fix it" voice. It was just quiet, and it was sad, but it was firm. I am not asking you to choose. On the other end of the line, there was just silence. This was not in his script. I have never once asked you to choose between me and your wife. I continued. This was never about you picking sides. But Mom, this, I said, my voice cutting through his excuse, was about your wife insulting me. In my home. At my table. I know, but... And this, I said, and this was the hardest part, was about you and your father, sitting right there, and letting her. I heard him take in a sharp breath. He had no answer for that. I know how she is, Floyd, I said, and I looked at Hubert, who was just watching me, his eyes wide. And I know how you are. You're a peacemaker, I said, and my voice was full of a sad, aching love. You're just like your father. You just want the fuss to stop. You'll do anything to make it quiet. You'll even, I said, my voice dropping, you'll even let me get hurt, just so you don't have to have an argument. It was the whole awful broken truth of my marriage, of my son. So, I said, I'm telling you what I have chosen. Hubert had his hands clasped on the table. He was leaning forward. He was with me. I've chosen me, I whispered. I've spent my whole life, Floyd, my whole life, keeping quiet just to make everyone else comfortable. I've spent 47 years making sure your father never had to be uncomfortable. I've spent 45 years making sure my children were happy. And I took a deep, shaky breath. I am tired of being quiet, Floyd. The silence on the phone was absolute, empty. I love you, I said, and the tears, they were finally coming, but they weren't guilt tears. They were just sad. I will always love you. You are my son. But I will not be belittled. Not by Danielle. Not by anyone. Not anymore. And I took a breath. I will not apologize for standing up for myself. There. It was done. I had said it. I had refused to fix it. Floyd was just silent. I could practically hear him processing it. He had no tools for this. His one tool, Mom will fix it. I had just taken it away. So, he finally said, his voice was tiny. He was a little boy. So what happens now? I closed my eyes. That's up to you, honey. That's not my choice to make. It's yours. And it's Danielle's. My home, I said, is always open to you. But it is not open to disrespect. The door is open for a relationship. But it's built on respect now. That's the new rule. If you and she can do that, then I'm right here. But I said, and my voice hardened just for a second, I'm not going back. I'm not going back to being the person you all just let get hurt. The silence. It was just over. He whispered, I have to go. He was running. He couldn't do it. He was fleeing. I know, I whispered. I love you, Floyd. Bye, Mom. The dial tone was so loud. I hung up the phone. The kitchen was silent. It was just me and Hubert. I turned around. I was shaking. The adrenaline, the resolve, it was all gone. I just felt empty. I walked to the table, pulled out the chair, and sat down across from him. He had heard all of it. He had seen me do the one thing he had never been able to do. He was looking at me like he had never seen me before. Carly, he whispered. He wanted me to apologize. Hubert, I whispered back. My voice was gone. I know, he said. And I didn't. I said, I couldn't. I know. I looked at him, and the tears came. The real ones. A whole lifetime of them. He's gone, I sobbed. I think I've lost him. Hubert. I think I've lost my son. I put my face in my hands, and I just cried. I cried for Christmas, for Floyd, for Danielle, for me, for 47 years of silence. And then I felt something new. Hubert, he wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He had reached across the table. His hand, his warm, old, wrinkled hand, just laid it on top of mine. He just covered my hand with his. I looked up at him. His eyes were wet. He was crying, too. No, he whispered, his voice hoarse. You haven't lost him, Carly. He squeezed my hand. You've just given him a choice. And I just cried. But for the first time in days, for the first time in years, I wasn't crying alone. We just sat there, my hand under his, on our kitchen table. The house was so quiet, but it was the first time in my memory that the silence didn't feel empty. It wasn't the silence of avoidance, of two people hiding in the same house. It was the silence of wreckage, the silence of two people who had just watched the whole thing burn down and were now just sitting in the ashes. But we were sitting there together. He didn't let go of my hand. He didn't get up and walk away. He didn't tell me it would be okay or pat me on the back. He just sat there, and he let me cry. I knew in that moment my marriage was changed. It was broken in a way, but maybe it was the kind of breaking that has to happen, the kind that lets the light in. After a long time, I don't know how long, he finally squeezed my hand. He got up. He walked over to the stove, and he put the kettle on. He never did that. I was the tea maker. I was the one who took care of those things. I'll make us some tea, Carly, he said, and his voice was raw. I just watched him. This man I'd been married to for 47 years. This stranger. And I just nodded. Thank you, Hubert, I whispered. The next few days were quiet, but it was that new quiet. My daughters called, of course. I told them about the phone call with Floyd. Evelyn, my fiery one, was furious. He what? She yelled through the phone. He wanted you to apologize? He's a coward, Mom. He's just like Dad. And I stopped her. No, honey, I said, and the word surprised me. He's not just like his father. Not anymore. And I told her about Hubert, about his confession, about him holding my hand. The phone just went silent. Wow, Evelyn finally said, Wow, Mom, that's something. Charlotte, my worrier, was just sad. He'll come around, Mom, she said, though it sounded like a question. He just needs time. He'll call back. Won't he? I don't know, honey, I said, and that was the truth. I just didn't know. January came. Hubert, and I took down the Christmas tree. That was always my job. But this year, he helped. I stood on the little step stool, unwinding the lights, and he held the ladder. I took down all the ornaments, all my cluttered memories. I came to Floyd's little ornament, the clay handprint from 1983, his tiny baby hand. I just stood there, on the stool, holding it, and the tears just came. The old Hubert would have left the room. He would have found something to do in the garage. But the new Hubert, he just stayed. He just stood there. He put his hand on my ankle, just rested it there. A silent, I'm here. I wiped my eyes. I wrapped the little handprint in tissue paper, and I put it in the box. We finished packing everything away. The house felt so empty, but lighter. Life settled. It settled into this new, strange, quiet normal. Hubert and I were different. It wasn't magic. He didn't suddenly become some romantic, talkative hero. He was still Hubert. He still read his paper, but now he read it in the kitchen, with me. He'd make the coffee, and he'd talk. He'd say, Looks like rain today, Carly. And I'd say, Yes, I think I heard that. And it was just that. But it was everything. He was present. He wasn't hiding from me, and I wasn't angry at him anymore. I felt sad for him, sad for all the years he had been so afraid. Our marriage was quieter, but it was honest, for the first time. But Floyd, the phone, it didn't ring. A week went by, then two. January turned into February. My son didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't send an email. Just nothing. This was the price. This was the cost of standing up for myself. The pain of it was real. It was a dull ache in my chest every single day. I missed him. I missed my son. And my grandchildren. That was a new kind of pain. I realized she wasn't just punishing me. She was using them to punish me. And that was a cruelty I hadn't prepared for. Did I do the right thing? I asked myself that every single day. Was it worth it? Was it worth losing my son, losing my grandchildren? I'd sit on the porch with my cup of tea, the tea Hubert had made me, and I'd think about that awful plastic smile I used to wear. I'd think about that sick, tight feeling in my stomach every Christmas. I'd think about my daughters looking at me with pity. I'd think about Hubert hiding. I'd think about the years of swallowing my own voice, the weight of all that silence. And I realized the weight was gone. I was sad, yes. I was heartbroken about Floyd, but I wasn't carrying that awful weight anymore. I wasn't responsible for Hubert's comfort. I wasn't responsible for Floyd's tense marriage. I wasn't responsible for Danielle's anger. I was just responsible for me. And that was the freedom. It wasn't a happy, giddy freedom. It was lonely, and it was quiet, but it was real. I had spent 47 years keeping the peace, and I finally learned what that really meant. Keeping the peace just meant that I was the one who had to suffer. I was the one who had to be silent. I was the one who had to be disrespected, all so everyone else could be comfortable. True peace, It isn't just the absence of a fight. True peace is the presence of respect. Respect for each other. And respect for yourself. I had to break my family's peace just to find my own. And I don't know what happens next. I truly don't. Maybe Floyd will call tomorrow. Maybe he won't call for a year. Maybe he'll never understand. But I am not going back. I am 67 years old. And I am finally free. So now I have to ask you, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent? Would you have swallowed it one more time just to keep the family together for one more Christmas? To keep your son and your grandchildren in your life? Or would you have stood up for yourself like I did, even if it meant risking everything? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. This is hard, and I think we all need to talk about it. And if this story spoke to you, if it felt real to you, I'd be so grateful if you'd like this video and maybe share it with someone else who needs to hear that they're not alone. It helps so much. And be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We talk about these kinds of real-life stories all the time. Thank you for listening to me. There's another story waiting for you right now. Just click that box on the screen to watch the next video. I'll see you there.